Hi, welcome to this first course on pay equity and pay transparency. Simply put, pay equity is the elimination of compensation gaps based on race, gender, sexual orientation, disability or ability, age, or the intersection of any of these demographics. Providing fair, equitable, and unbiased compensation to employees for their work allows organizations to show employees that they value a diverse and inclusive workplace. For instance, if your organization wants to create an atmosphere where there is representational diversity among Black and white web developers, or women are equally represented in administrative roles as they are in the boardroom, or that employees from historically marginalized backgrounds are included and at a high level with high pay, you likely need to consider pay equity. Being transparent with employees also shows that you and your organization are willing to act on their values and words. Assessing pay equity through pay audits, an organization can discover inequities and inequalities such as underrepresentation or job segregation of underrepresented minorities. Armed with this information, this data about disparities, you and your organization can actively address their discriminatory HR practices across recruitment, promotion, training, or succession planning.
Communities with which it serves, right? So we're looking at that and the extent to which it's equitable. And what we mean by that is, are people inside of an organization having similar experiences? Are people getting promoted at similar rates? Do they have similar opportunities for advancement? And so we've created a survey, and we've created sort of a high level framework for the things that indicate to whether DE&I is going to be successful. And we sort of measure these roughly 20 things across these four big buckets. And we're starting off with pay equity and pay transparency because, let's face it, right? Like, good intentions do not pay the rent. We need to know whether our pay is equitable, and Fee's going to talk shortly about what that means, right? And the extent to which there is transparency inside of an organization. Now, what I'm hoping to leave you all with today is you'll know really clearly the difference between what is pay transparency and pay equity, as well as some other vocabulary around it. Will make the connection for you very clearly between what equity and transparency in pay has to do with DE&I, so that you can take it back to your organization and make a case with leaders if you haven't already started this work, right? And our hope, honestly, is that we leave you with some resources to pick up wherever you are today with respect to your organization and take it one step further. That's it, like one step further, okay? This is the first of 12 sessions that we're gonna do. And at the end of the webinar today, we'll tell you what we're planning on doing. So we thought we could start with a video this morning, and I'm going to try my best. Like, I have some like technological challenges. It's like 37 going on 80 right now. So let's see if this is going to work for us. Okay. Okay, so here's the context. This is a really, really famous video of a researcher who studies fairness. And in this experiment, what you're going to see are two capuchin monkeys. And the monkeys, they love grapes. Okay, so like a reward for something well done is grapes. But they are also willing to eat cucumbers. They don't love cucumbers, right? It's basically water. They don't love cucumbers. They love grapes. And so you're about to see what happens. The monkeys each have a task to do. It's something really simple. The researcher is going to give them a rock. The monkey has to return the rock back, and then they get a prize. Okay. Oh no, there's no sound. Okay, let's try this again. Y'all are super Seattle polite, and you didn't tell me that you couldn't hear what was happening. Okay, I'm gonna try again. Okay, I think this is gonna. All right, let's rewind it. Let me take it back.
The experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
All right. So I think y'all get what's happening, right? Monkey does not want cucumber because cucumber is not great, right? So we thought we'd start here because here's something that I know is that even if we don't know what equity looks like in a policy or process, we know what fairness feels like. And all of us know when something isn't quite fair, right? So I thought I would do a little bit of vocab to start us off this morning around the difference between equality and equity, right? Equity is a state of fairness. But what we tend to do as organizations typically is equality, right? And I brought this image because this is like so relevant right now. This is a real life example of what's happening, where the government has said every person who has an address recognized by USPS can get 4 tests, regardless of whether you're a single person living in an apartment, you can still get 4, or you live in a multi-generational home with 5, 6, 8 people, right? Or you just have a family size that's larger than 4. The government's like, if you have an address, you can get 4 tests, right? And that is equality. And we do a lot of equality in organizations. What we really struggle to do is equity, and our government also struggles to do equity, right? And in a state of equity, we would get as many tests as we needed, not just an arbitrary number. And where we hope to lead to, right? Like, what is the hope for the future? The hope for the future is justice. And that is a big focus of our work, is really thinking about how we start to quantify things like justice so that they can be measured, right? Because if you're not measuring it, it's really hard to know whether you're making progress or not. And in a state of justice, using this example of COVID tests, we know that like tests are available to whomever needs one, whenever they need it, regardless of their housing status, because getting tested to see whether you have COVID or not should not be dependent on whether you're housed, right, in like a permanent structure. So that said, right, how does it apply to pay equity and pay transparency? I thought I would bring just a snapshot of what I'm seeing in research and in the world of news right now. And these are a couple of things that I'm noticing, which is we know that even in 2022, women who negotiate their salaries face backlash more in some industries than other. They're seen as troublemakers, like their offers are taken away when they try and negotiate pay. And some of you here may have had those experiences, right? We also know that, like, again, it's 2022, women, and in particular women of color, are most often handed non-promotable tasks like taking notes, ordering lunches, making PowerPoint presentations. And what I have experienced, and I think some of you on this call have as well, is that that's not just like newer employees or junior employees. Like, you are going to see like a CHRO of a company still doing those things, often because that role is occupied predominantly by women. Something that the world of research is paying attention to more and more is the immigrant income gap and the immigrant experience in the workplaces. Yeah, thanks, Meg, for chiming in. You're like, I'm a boss and I'm asked to throw parties. Why? There are like literally firms that do that. You can hire them, right? So paying attention to what's happening with respect to immigrants in workplaces. We know now that immigrants in first gen is if you were born in the US, but your parents were immigrants, often make less than their in-country born peers, right? Specifically their white peers. And in many instances, we know that employers threaten people's legal status. And this isn't just true if you are working as a nail technician or, right, in like what is called a low wage job, but also, right, in corporate America. People's like H-1B status or green card is being threatened when they're asking for greater pay transparency, pay promotions, and more. So this is the state of affairs with respect to pay. And I don't want to keep us in this place of like what's not working. So I'm going to pass it to Fee to tell us like what can work and how can it work better for all of us.
Thanks, Aparna. And I just also want to highlight on what Aparna touched on with regards to justice, is that at the root of it all is that people feeling they receive what they think they deserve, very similarly to the capuchin monkeys that you just saw. And at the organizational level, justice is accountability and transparency. And this allows like the organization and the employees inside to keep an eye out for potential corruption from occurring, which has become really, really important for Millennial and Gen Z employees. And right now, in the midst of like this great resignation, it's really important to like understand what these employees desire, as this is like the future of the workplace. And actually, like, there's a reason why Millennials and Gen Zers care so much. It's because SEC violations have been reported to be the highest in 2020 than they have ever been. And I think Millennials and Gen Z, or the younger employees, are just really asking and expecting a little bit more, like asking for more accountability from their companies. So there are different types of organizational justice, but the ones most relevant to today's discussion on pay equity and pay transparency are threefold. So it's distributive justice, procedural justice, and informational justice. So it's a lot, but I'm going to break it down for you at a very high level. Distributive justice is the fair allocation of resources according to need. Procedural justice is policies and processes that give voice, opportunities, and access fairly and consistently across people and time. And informational justice is when explanations are given in an honest and thorough way to employees to understand. So that kind of sets the stage of pay equity in an organization and workplace. And next slide, Aparna. All right, so anyway, I just want to start off with this caveat too, is that we are not lawyers, like Aparna and I, and so you should always definitely consult with your legal team first. We're here to provide like guidance on equity, but this is definitely not legal advice. And then secondly, I want to emphasize the importance of asking your employees first via pilot group or survey to assess the needs of your organization. And that's really a very important starting point for all action, organizational change, and intervention. It's best to start by getting input from your employees because it shows that their voices and preferences are valued and considered when decisions are made by the organization and leadership. So as we know, there's no one size fits all, and you should definitely ask how your employee feels in regards to like pay equity and pay transparency or company before. I know we're eager to jump into action, but that's the first basic starting point. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, what is pay equity? Like, this is the meat of our discussion today. And pay equity is essentially the same pay across race, ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation, and other demographic groups for performing the same or similar jobs. Pay is controlled for factors like experience level, job performance, education, tenure, and location. So that's where you can see the differences in pay. And pay equity is also the innate perception that fair and equitable pay comes from feeling that their level of effort asked from the organization is fair, considered like in comparison to their pay. And that is also factored in how much their colleagues and peers are exerting in terms of effort and what their pay are. And then on another, contrast that to externally on a macro level is the pay to other organizations with same job titles. And so, and lastly, there's a third fold. Equitable pay also means paying employees enough to have a living wage in the city or state they reside in. I threw a lot at you right now. So are there any thoughts or questions thus far that comes up for you that you could either say out loud or enter into the chat box? No? Okay. So next, now that we've discussed what pay equity is, let's dive into what pay transparency is. So at a very high level, pay transparency means the extent people are familiar with each other's pay. And if you look online, pay transparency could mean a million things, but it is, however, it's no longer just a binary thought of pay transparency or pay secrecy. There's a whole range, like a whole gamut of what it could be. And there are different types of models, but the ones that we found to be the most easy to understand is a spectrum developed by PayScale. And as you can see on the slide, it ranges from one end of pay secrecy, full pay secrecy, to the other extreme of pay transparency. And there are 5 steps in between. So the first step is what employees know what they make. They and the company. It's private, it's kept secret, and that's the first step. The second step is sharing with organizations how is market data is used to benchmark pay at the company. And right in the middle is where can employees find clear policies on how to obtain a pay raise or information on pay ranges, on job descriptions, and pay structures at your company. And this is actually currently where Colorado lands with their recent Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. And the next step is going beyond that. It is having the ability to explain why. Why is a pay determined the way it is? It answers questions like, what are the factors that determine pay? How much do these factors determine pay? Does the company reward certain types of behaviors? How are bonuses given? Are stock and equity given fairly to new hires? And this is the informational justice piece that I talked about earlier. It's companies having the open communication, constant communication with employees to understand how pay policies are equitable at the company. And at the final stage, it's the whoa, the salary and pay ranges are completely available internally or externally based on job titles and employee name. An example of internal full pay transparency could be a document or oftentimes a spreadsheet that is shared on an HR portal or SharePoint. And you could access the job title, the job level, and the compensation associated with that. Organizations, if it's a small enough company, you can also have employee name associated with that compensation. And external pay is where you take all that information and publish it on the worldwide internet for me to be able to access. And you might be thinking what company actually does that? And actually, you could see public universities, government agencies, county office jobs. You could find the pay level, sometimes employee name as well with that pay compensation. And there are a few. You might think these are public agencies, but there are actually a few too private companies who are starting to practice this level of extreme transparency because one of their core values is radical transparency. And this is one way that they can show and walk the talk that they are being transparent.
Hey, Fee, there's a question in the chat that says are there any big name for-profits, private sector companies that are closer to the woe side? Who are your favorites to watch for?
Mm-hmm. So Buffer is, I think, one of the leading organizations right now that promote pay transparency as a for-profit company. And they actually, they've gone through, I don't know, 7 iterations since 2013. And they fix their equation every few years, but I actually found the public spreadsheet of everyone's pay online with employee names, the cities they work in, and everything is adjusted based on experience level, like I discussed earlier, experience level, education level, and cost of living in the city they reside. Does that help? Okay, all right, let's move on to the next slide. Oh wait, sorry, stay here. Okay, so I want you to take a moment to scan the QR code at the top of this slide. We're gonna take a quick poll on where your company falls on the spectrum. You take a minute to do that, and once you've done that, it would be nice to also understand why is your company where it is? What are some of the reasons that leadership has provided to you or to employees why it can't be more transparent, or why it promotes more of a pay secrecy route?
Where's the code?
It's at the top of the slide. It's the little circle.
Yeah, go ahead, pull out your phones. It's going to let you do it.
All right. Has everyone got the QR code? We could see the live results come in. Oh no. I can answer for you, Shira, too. You want to tell me how?
Yeah, Shira, go ahead and pop it into the chat if like where you are, and we'll plug it into the back. All right.
Okay, Aparna, I'll share on my screen.
Perfect.
All right, so it seems majority, this is a good spread, actually. This is more surprising than I would have expected, but this is awesome. So as we could have expected, the majority of respondents fall on towards the private information known between there's 13 results, 13 respondents. And oh, I was wondering, I was like, what if we calculate the 15, 8, 8, and 23? Does that combat the 46? This is also really interesting. The full transparency, that's great. Okay, so I think as more changes and employees are like the type of employees are asking of employers, I would expect that this bar would go down and would be more evenly distributed towards B, C, D, and eventually we'll get to E, but that's the pipe dream. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So we can go back to our presentation. So now that we've covered the main differences between pay equity and pay transparency, let's dig a little deeper into what some of the common buzzwords and vocabulary around this topic is. And pay gap. Pay gap's like the hot like subject right now, and it is essentially defined as the disparity of average compensation for two people or demographic groups, and that would cover gender, race, ethnicities, and other marginalized groups. Next slide. And expanding on that concept a little bit more is uncontrolled pay gap and controlled pay gap. So the difference, I'm just going to define some of this and then I'll go into examples, but the uncontrolled pay gap is where the pay gap uses median salary for two groups, accounting for all of the jobs that these two groups have. An example of that would be men are often, this is an often cited statistics that you hear, women are paid 82 cents for every dollar men make on average. So the controlled pay gap is where the pay gap uses median salary of two demographic groups in the same job with same qualifications. And an example of that would be the slide that you can see, like men and women in the same or similar with like similar job qualifications only have 2 cents of a pay gap. And essentially it's a different way of looking at data, but just be really careful when you hear what pay gap is. Like you could ask like, what does this actually mean? Because that is a huge margin too, like 82 cents versus 98 cents. And the controlled pay gap offers a better accurate assessment. And the statistics that you often see in the news and social media that are very clickbaity, you definitely want to understand like the nuance between these things. And
so I think many of you have seen those, like Black women make 54 cents to $1, or like Native women make, right? Like that is referring to the uncontrolled gender pay gap. And you'll see that in the slide that there's actually like quotes around opportunity pay gap, because it isn't that Black women are making 50 cents to the dollar, it's that they're in jobs, and when you sort of average everything out, they're making 50 cents to the dollar because they're in jobs that aren't being paid as well, right? So it's like comparing all women's salaries and all of men's salaries, but we know that women disproportionately work in lower wage fields, which is cyclical too, right? Because women work in it, it's not paid well, right? Like nurses and teachers and HR professionals, lots of these fields. So I think it's okay to consume content and be aware of how wide the opportunity gap is, but using that to have like rough conversations inside of your company is not something that as a consultant I would recommend, right? Like you don't want to take it to your boss and say, I get only paid 50 cents to the dollar. But what you can start asking them for is, do you know what the controlled gender or racial or age pay gap is in our company? Or I suspect that like pay isn't equitable here. Have we done a pay study? I would love to know what the pay gap is.
Yeah, thanks, Aparna. And also too, that like this topic is connected to other types of strategic HR practices, whether it's recruitment, promoting your employees, advancement, like it's all interconnected together. And it's really important to like, and it would seem overwhelming if, it feels like I want to focus on pay equity, but now I have to fix all these other parts. Just know that it's iterative. It's always like working to make it get better. And so you can also join us for our next webinar as we talk more about advancement as well. All right. So other types of concepts and buzzwords are pay compression. And pay compression means when pay is too similar. And an example of that would be, as you can see right now, hiring is gone crazy. A lot of employees are brought on a very high level of pay to be able to just attract the talent that is the market right now. But what does that mean for the employee who's been with your company for 10 years and is getting a lower compensation rate than the new employee brought in just recently? That is when the pay band or like different types of job roles that shouldn't be close are close together. And that could also mean, if somehow the pay structure has been done and it hasn't been updated, and like a manager's pay is very similar to that of their direct reports. There should be a big difference between a manager and the direct reports pay. Okay, and pay audit. Pay audit is the process used to identify pay gaps or disparities. And there are different companies that offer these services too, that we could make recommendations down the road. And it's best practice to conduct a pay audit at least once a year, if not like twice a year. Next. And in recent years, I kind of hinted at this, pay transparency laws have been passed, starting with California in 2018, followed by Washington. And these are just some states, with Colorado being the most aggressive because it extends to employers hiring remotely. And there was a bit of a backlash, like employers were then hiring in all states except for Colorado because they were trying to not have to deal with pay transparency. But it's a back and forth, and I almost feel like if companies are being proactive, they would try, this is the way of the future, because New York was the most recent one to have passed it as well, and like a few weeks ago, with more to come. And this is to be proactive, is to expect or assume that this is the way employers should operate in the future. And I just also want to take a moment to focus on Washington at the next slide, just to highlight what we have here in our state. And I have a screenshot of the difference between the rights that of employees and those of job applicants when they're applying. So a few like distinctions for what pay transparency could mean is that it is illegal to ask about their wage or salary history when they are applying for a job. And that is no longer a requirement to like understand what is their minimum wage or salary sort of expectation. And these job applicants can also ask for the salary of the new position if they request it. The employer should be able to pass that information freely to them. And then for employees, that's some similar rights, but it is elaborated that, you know, employees are allowed to discuss their pay without retaliation. I think in the past, employees are discouraged from discussing their pay with each other. And there's like some clause like, you know, we could, you know, we're an at-will company, but this, I just wanted to give you an example of what one act or law in one state would look like. All right, next slide. So now that we've flown at a very high like overview of the difference between pay transparency and pay equity, you might be wondering like, what can I do right now to move my company further along? And a few steps you can take towards greater pay equity is transparent compensation systems. You can also have very objective metrics in measuring performance. And you can have an approved budget just so that you could fix a pay compression like I discussed earlier, or the pay gap when you find it during a pay audit. Next slide. And same goes. These are some basic steps you can take to get your company towards a more transparent pay system. You can start with the basics, which is like establishing a pay philosophy that aligns with your company culture and like HR strategies, like I mentioned earlier, recruiting, hiring, performance management. You could conduct a pay audit and it's scary, but be open to potential like bad news because like things aren't equitable. But you know, that's the first step in the right direction towards pay equity and pay transparency. And then you can also publish pay ranges on job descriptions when you're hiring. And another easy thing to do is to train managers on how to have open discussions with their direct reports on their compensation. So I'm going to pass it back to Aparna.
Awesome. All right. That was a lot of information in a 45 very short minutes. So I want to open it up to Q&A, like what questions are coming up for you. Fee is an expert in this area, and we'll take a couple of minutes for questions. And you're welcome to pop them into the chat, as well as come off of mute.